and I said that we would be in Luke chapter 19, so we're just going to go straight there. We've been dismantling the myth that forgiveness is unconditional. We've been dismantling the myth that the abused need to forgive their abuser without the abuser repenting. We've been dispelling the myth that forgiveness is for the person who is sinned against and not for the sinner. We've basically taken everything scriptural, everything biblical, and we've twisted it sideways and flipped it upside down, and we present that as gospel to other people. And I think not only is it wrong, I think it's hurtful, and it greatly empowers the abuser. I am very grateful for those of you who were at the abuse symposium yesterday, and as you heard with your own ears, abusers don't care. They don't stop. They don't have a conscience. And so, what's the purpose in forgiving them? When you forgive them, trust me when I say this, they're laughing at you. And so, scripturally, forgiveness is precisely for the person who has sinned when they repent. And the purpose is, as we mentioned, it's restoration. It's to restore honor. It's to restore a right relationship with God. It's to restore a relationship between people. And that's why we have forgiveness. To say that forgiveness is for you, and they won't even know that you're forgiving them. What's the point? It makes no sense, and nor is it biblical. Okay, so Luke chapter 19, Jesus and Zacchaeus. We're going through the stories where Jesus forgives people minus baptism. There are only 5 examples in the entire New Testament that I can think of. And I make the argument that the scriptural argument has nothing to do with Old Covenant versus New Covenant. We're the ones who've done that. These stories of forgiveness have everything to do with, number one, Jesus having the authority to forgive sins when he wants, how he wants. And I think that's the number one point. The number 2 point is Jesus is demonstrating a biblical form of forgiveness where forgiveness is for the person who carries the debt. And he's restoring people who are extremely broken and tormented over the wrongs that they've done. And Jesus is showing that there's grace in that, and there's forgiveness, and there needs to be. It's not optional. That part's not optional. When somebody has genuinely repented, when somebody has genuinely come to Jesus and is broken and tormented over what they've done, you can't say, well, I don't forgive you. At that point, right, you must forgive. And Jesus demonstrates it beautifully in these stories. So Zacchaeus is one of those. Luke 19, verse 1, he entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a wee little man. A little man was key, that's right. He was a chief tax collector. This is awesome. I love Luke's one-liners. And was rich. Luke is notorious for little bitty one-liners. My favorite one that Luke records, no other gospel writer records this. It's the betrayal of Peter, and Luke records a chilling line in one sentence. And Jesus turned and looked directly at Peter. And Peter went away and wept. Luke's the the only one who records that piercing eye contact, and I'm fully convinced that this was a look of forgiveness. Jesus knew. Peter wasn't like, I don't know the man, he's a jerk, Peter, I think, when he heard the rooster, I think Peter broke on a level that none of us have ever broken on that level. And when Jesus turns and looks him in the eye, I think it was a look of Jesus letting him know it's going to be okay. And how do we know that? Well, because of Peter later on. We fortunately have records of Peter very shortly after this incident. One of those being John is the only one who records this. They're on the boat, and Jesus is on the shore, and somebody says, hey, that's Jesus. You remember that scene? Peter jumps out of the boat and starts swimming. He can't even wait for the boat to get to the shore, and they're not even that far. Peter is swimming his little heart out, and as we mentioned, Jewish people don't swim because they were afraid of demons that were in the abyss. Yeah, so their view of demonology, Jews didn't swim. Peter leaps out of the boat, and he swims his little heart out to Jesus. And just the interactions between Jesus and Peter post-resurrection, we know that Peter was absolutely shattered when he denied Jesus. So, look at these little one-liners. Zacchaeus was rich. Jesus, at this point, has had a lot to say about rich people, right? And it's not positive, most of it. Very difficult for rich people to enter heaven. Jesus did not like rich people. Jesus wasn't saying, if you're rich, then I'm going to look down on you. Not at all. But he was talking about it's very difficult once you become rich to enter the kingdom, because it's easy to fall into a temptation to allow your riches to control you. Now, combine that with what's his profession? The tax collector. All the more so. Tax collectors were not really the most reputable people.
Yeah, and he was a chief.
And he was a chief tax collector, so he was the boss. That's right. So he's the boss. He's very wealthy, which would imply, at least in the eyes of other people, that he was dishonest. And maybe at one point he was. Verse 3, and he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small of stature. So he ran on ahead, and he climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up to him and said, Zacchaeus. Now I want you to pause there for a second, because Zacchaeus now hears his name from Jesus, who's the person who he was seeking, and now I think Zacchaeus is freaking out. This is probably not like Zacchaeus is like, yeah, dude knows my name. I don't think Zacchaeus is really excited at this point. My guess is he's pretty unsure at this point. How does he know my name? What have I done? Uh-oh. I mean, these are things that would be going through my mind. Jesus says, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down, and I think that sentence, that next thing that came out of Jesus' mouth, was reassuring to Zacchaeus. I need to stay at your house today. That was, in Jewish culture, that was one of the highest honors when you had a rabbi who wanted to stay at the place, and you could host a rabbi. That was a high honor. and he received him joyfully. Verse 7, and when they saw it, looks a little bit ambiguous. Is they the crowd? Is they the disciples? Is it both? Probably both. When they saw it, they all grumbled. He's going to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. Now, can you imagine, in your mind, Bernie Madoff climbing up a little sycamore tree, right?
I don't think that would help you.
So Bernie climbing up the tree, right? And Jesus coming up to that tree saying, Bernie Madoff? Bernie Madoff, the guy who made off with everybody's money? Yeah, the white-collar psychopath. He's spending the rest of his life in prison. Yeah.
That's one of the hidden scriptures.
Bernie's not, that's right, Bernie's not in the Bible. That's right.
It's implied though. It's implied though.
But can you imagine that? Like, in the people's minds, Zacchaeus is Bernie Madoff. Zacchaeus, that doesn't really work with his name. Zacchaeus off with everybody's money. Bernie Madoff made off with everybody's money. I think at this point everybody's thinking, what are you doing? Like, okay, Jesus, I was with you to this point. Keep in mind, Jesus is what? Homeless. Throughout his ministry, he's homeless. How's Jesus being provided for? Mostly by the women of Galilee, the Galilean women. You have Mary Magdalene. You have this group of women who I don't know their income level, but my guess is that they're not overly wealthy, and they're giving and giving and giving and giving. They're following Jesus everywhere. These Galilean women were by Jesus' side throughout his entire ministry, and it's so subtle in Scripture, but it is there. These Galilean women are following Jesus everywhere, and they're constantly meeting Jesus' needs, his physical needs. They're feeding him. They're taking care. I mean, they were incredible. These women were absolutely incredible and pivotal and vital for Jesus' ministry. Absolutely. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Imagine in their mind, because they're there. They've seen all the miracles. They've seen just this crazy ministry that blows everybody's mind. And now all of a sudden Jesus goes up to the Bernie Madoff of the time. Hey, come here, I'm going to stay at your house. Have you lost your mind? Jesus, you need to go back to the people who you've been healing. The lepers. The people, the widows who are, their kids are dying and you're raising them up from the dead. You need to go back. Jesus, you're losing your focus here, man. And I think this is what's going on in people's minds, right? They start to grumble. He's going to be a guest of a man who's a sinner. Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, and I love this, because it shuts the mouths of the people who are standing there. Half of my goods, half, I give to the poor. This isn't I gave to the, or I will give to the poor. He's not like, oh, I've had a Jesus encounter. Now I'm going to start giving half my possessions. As long as you bless, like this isn't hypothetical. This isn't futuristic. This isn't making empty promises. He's saying, I give half of my possessions to the poor. My question is this, and it's a legitimate question. Who in that crowd, who in all of that crowd was giving 50% of their income to the poor? I would argue this percent. 0% of them. Zacchaeus is the only one. He's given 50% of his income to the poor. And nobody knows. Now He wasn't out there banging cymbals and saying, yeah, I'm a chief tax collector, but I give to the poor. Nobody knew it. Nobody knew it except who? Jesus. Half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. If I've ripped anybody off, if I've done anything to rip anybody off at any point, I will restore it fourfold. Now that fourfold has background. Somebody read Leviticus chapter 6 and verse 5. Leviticus chapter 6 and verse 5.
For all that about which he has sworn falsely, he shall restore its full value, add 1/5 more to it, and give it to whomever it belongs on the day of his trespass offering.
So if you've ripped anybody off, you're restored in full, you pay it back in full, and you add 1/5 to it. And then you give it to him to whom it belongs. You give it back to the original owner, the person who you ripped off. Right? He says on the day he realizes his guilt, on the day of your guilt offering. And then Numbers chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. Numbers 5, 6, and 7. Speak to the people of Israel, when a man or a woman commits any of the sins that the people commit by breaking faith with the Lord, and that person realizes his guilt, he shall confess that sin that he has committed, and he shall make full restitution for his wrong, adding 1/5 to it, and giving it to him whom he did the wrong. Zacchaeus takes this and he takes the biblical mathematical equation and he adds to it. He's a righteous man. We can't argue that Zacchaeus is just this horrible person and he's wealthy and he's ripping people off. Zacchaeus he is genuinely a righteous man. In verse 9, Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house," saying this in front of everyone. I don't think this was private. He's whispering it in Zacchaeus' ear. He's letting everybody know today. I want you people to see this. I'm going to testify to what grace and mercy looks like. Today salvation has come to this house. Jesus forgives him, since he is also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man, this is interesting, this is fascinating. We can't take this sentence out. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. What's he saying about Zacchaeus? He was lost. This man was a sinner. This man, we don't know Zacchaeus' full background. I wish we did. But I guess it doesn't really matter, or else God would have recorded it. But I think Zacchaeus was this man who did rip people off. It was so common for tax collectors were hated. So common. It was the norm for tax collectors to just rip people off. And they were cheap. They were thieves. It's what they did. They were dishonest people. I have no doubt that Zacchaeus was. And then I think at some point, prior to his seeking Jesus out in the story, Zacchaeus changes his life around. He restores the goods to the people who he's ripped off, and now he's, and we don't know how long he's been doing this, but we know he currently was giving 50% of his income to the poor. He was taking care of the poor. My question is this: what were all the people in the crowd doing for the poor?
Giving the money that he was giving to the poor.
They were giving their money to the tax collectors.
Still not clear here. You said that fourfold had a significance, but when we read back in the Old Testament, it's one that.
Well, the significance is that you were required to pay back. You had to pay somebody back in full. The significance is he's not just pulling numbers out of the air. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to do a fourfold. He knows the law of Moses. This is the guy who knows scriptures. He knows the Bible. He's not just pulling numbers out of thin air.
I think the example would be if you stole $100, the law says you pay back 120, and Zacchaeus says, hey, I'm going to give you 400.
Yeah, that's correct. That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's more clear. Thank you. I'm not a math person. It wasn't my major. Yeah.
Correct me.
I will.
Well, I'm glad somebody will. Is this the only reference in the Gospels about this story?
I believe so. Yeah, I think Luke's the only one who does report it.
You keep saying that he was giving his 50%.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Your translation, does it say that he is giving, or I will give to the poor 50%, half my?
It says he is, and I went back and looked at it in the Koine Greek, and it's a present active.
Okay.
Present active indicative. Is that right?
Exactly.
It's present tense, and it's not a past tense present. Like in the Greek language, you can use past tense in the present. You can use present tense to refer back to the future.
It was something he was presently doing.
But he was presently doing it. Yes.
Yeah, because when I read this, it says half of my possessions I will give.
That's interesting. What translation is that?
New American
Vernon.
Yeah, mine says I gave.
Yeah.
Yours says he gave. That's interesting.
That's
I
present.
gave, I will give, I give.
Mine
I
says,
did.
Yeah. So in the original language, it's present tense. I give
I did.
50%.
That's why I was asking. It was. I said, no, wait.
Yeah. I give. And then I looked it up in the original language.
Because usually the New American Standard does a real good job on
Yeah.
Yeah.
translation.
Vernon.
Was Zacchaeus a Jew?
Yes. Yeah. He was a wee little Jewish man.
That's what got him in trouble.
I'm going to jump over to Matthew 18 because I referenced it last week, and we're going to end with Matthew 18 because it's just so powerful, and just understanding grace and mercy and all this stuff. I think it's so pivotal, so important, so vital. I'm going to start at the beginning because I think this is important too. We strip Matthew 18 out of its context. We're great at doing that, right? If somebody sins, we actually take away against you. If somebody sins, you don't show them his fault. And we jump right into that text and we strip it from the context that goes before and the context that comes right after. Matthew wrote this gospel in context for a reason. Matthew didn't write this so that we could cherry pick little passages out of it and use those to beat people up with verses. So let's start at the beginning of Matthew 18. Matthew 18:1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" It's an interesting question. And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them, and he said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." You don't get a better answer than that, and a more truthful Because what they're thinking is, which one of us is, how do we step up? How do we elevate? How do we become, number 2, number 3, number 4. I don't care where I am, but as long as I'm like working my way up and becoming greater. And we know this because of the conversations the disciples have with each other. They're walking along the road on the way to Capernaum, and they're having they're arguing with each other, they're fighting over which one of them is going to be at the right hand of Jesus when they die and go to heaven. They're arguing over it. So this is what they have in mind. Jesus' answer couldn't be more truthful. Unless you become like one of these kids, unless you humble yourself, unless you empty yourself of everything to become complete, children are completely dependent on their parents, completely dependent. I don't think they are, but they are. Unless you become completely dependent on God, unless you're humble like this child, you're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, the word is scandalon, where we get the word scandalize from. Whoever creates scandal, whoever offends one of these children, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck. The word is donkey millstone, too big to be carried by people. You have to hook the pickup truck to it and drag it around because you can't move it by hand. It'd be better if this person had the donkey millstone tied around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Well, we talked about this before. Why did that terrify them? Well, for one, your neck is broken before you ever get into the water, and then your body is dragged down where? Into the abyss, where what? Where the demons are. Jesus is saying you're being sent back to your place. This is where you belong. That would be better than if you were to offend one of my children who believe in me. Woe to the world for temptation to sin. So do you think Jesus is saying sin is serious? We'll ask the rhetorical question. Yeah, this is exactly his point. Sin is incredibly serious. People who incur debt, which is what sin is. You incur debt. You create debt because you offend somebody, all the more when you do it to a child. Sin is serious. Then temptations to sin. It flows right into this. Woe to the world for temptations to sin. For it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the one by whom the temptations come. It's an amazing passage. Damn the person who brings temptations to other people. That's what Jesus is saying. Damn the person. Woe to them. They're damned. Woe to the person who brings temptations to other people. And if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes and be thrown into the hell of fire. And then it goes into this parable of the lost sheep. It's just a natural progression into the next story. See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who's in heaven. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Now, here's my question. Who is the forgiveness for? That's right. Jesus is drawing this picture in their minds that everybody related to. They all knew what it was to shepherd. He's creating this picture after he's just saying, damn the person through whom temptations come. But if one of these persons, one of the people who's in the fold, one of the sheep, goes off, they wander off, they stray away, you go get them. For what purpose? To bring them back so that they can corrupt the rest of the crowd? And, like, you know what I mean? We get these pictures in our mind, and we don't really think through what Jesus is saying. The purpose is not to just drag people back in. You need to be at church. All right, we do that. We're like, you need to be at church. Why? It's not the point. Here's the point. You need restored. You need to find out whatever that sin was that made you stray away. You need to find out what it was that caused you to turn your back on the rest of your family and to walk away. You need to find that. You need to search it. Galatians 6, verses 1 and 2 speaks so clearly to that. If somebody wanders away, restore them gently. This restoration of your brothers and sisters is not, you idiot, you know. It's this restoration. It's saying, what you to break? What was it that caused you, or who was it that caused you to stray? Well, we don't ask those questions. We're like, why weren't you here? Because I didn't want to be here. Like, if people were really honest, I wasn't there because I didn't want to be there. Here's the questions we don't ask. Has anybody injured you? Kyla spoke to that yesterday. You guys, isn't that amazing? Kyla talked about why she's not here. Go back and listen to it. Absolutely, it's understandable, and I honor it, I praise it, and she's right. You know what question nobody ever asked her from here? Sadly, who injured you? Who injured you? The question never asked is, why aren't you at church? Why weren't you here? It's the wrong question. What's that? I don't think anybody knew that question, is the answer to that. Except me. I mean, I knew. But I think until you ask, you don't know. And I think we're asking the wrong questions, and this is the point. The point is restoration, right? This is the whole point of forgiveness. It's restoration. It's restoring people back. It's not saying, you need to be here. You know, somebody's out there partying and woo! And we're like, yeah, you need to be back at church. Okay, why? Well, I'm going to forgive you because forgiveness is for me. It's not for you. You kidding me? Jesus is painting the most perfect picture of what forgiveness and mercy and grace is supposed to look like. It's going after the sheep who've strayed. It's finding out why. It's understanding and relating and entering into their... This is amazing. He's not doing it from the pasture. Jesus isn't standing inside of the pasture saying, come back to us. What's he do? He walks out and he enters into the space where that person who strayed is. How often do we do that? We're staying inside the sheep pen and we're like, you need to come back. You know, come back here. Come back here. Jesus doesn't do that. He walks away, which is risky. So risky to leave your sheep, because what does that do? Think about this. I gotta ring that bell. Think about this. For a sheep to walk out of the sheep pen, what does that do? What does that do to the rest? To the 99 sheep, what does that do to them? It leaves them wide open for attack. It leaves them vulnerable. He's willing to do that. He's willing to risk that to enter into the space where the sheep is who's injured, who's sinned, who fell away. He's talking about sinners who fall away. He's willing to leave the rest open to attack them, to enter into the space where this person is who needs restored. Restoration is the point of the gospel. It's the whole point of Jesus. Restoration. Bringing people, seeking and saving the lost. You can't get away from it. And that's going to set the stage for next week when we talk about when your brother sins against you. See, we strip that from its context, brother. If your brother sins against you, go and hammer him over the head. And if he refuses to listen, then you humiliate him. Yeah. Bring an army with you, and then if he fails to do that, then you bring him off in the front, march him up the olive shade. That's how we read that passage, and that's not how it's meant to be. This passage is meant to be read as, man, if your brother sins against you, walk out of the sheep pen, and you go after him gently. Find out, man, what went wrong? How do I help you, and how do I restore you? And if they refuse, if they buck that, then you go and you bring 2 or 3 witnesses. And the point's not more manpower to intimidate this person. It's to establish witnesses before God. You say, man, this is so serious. Your soul is so serious. You can't underestimate how serious it is to restore your soul. So that's the point of forgiveness and mercy. So Matthew's just setting the stage for what's about to follow. Does that all make sense?
Kind of, sort of. Why do you look at me when you ask that question?
Well, because you're usually the one who's really confused. And if you get it, then I know everybody else got it. All right. Thank you all for